great pleasure to introduce Andreas Kornevall, who has recently joined the faculty of the Centre as well. So we're very excited about our new connection and collaboration with Andreas. And for those of you who don't know, Andreas is an author, storyteller, and ecological activist. He grew up in South Africa, Sweden, and Switzerland, and now directs the Earth Restoration Service charity. And in response to the sixth mass extinction, he was the catalyst behind the Life Care movement, memorials for species rendered extinct at human hands. So as a storyteller, Andreas works with old myths and fairy tales, which shine a torchlight on life's journey, and his stories tend to gravitate around the Norse material, which have led him to lecture and perform in universities and other educational centres. He's also a prize-winning author whose work has been published in magazines such as Resurgence, The Ecologist, Permaculture magazine, and in the Dark Mountain series. And he's a member of the Fornsaid Old Customs Association in Sweden, which works closely with ancient Norse culture, traditions, and spirituality, unearthing old legends, forgotten folklore, and endangered Norse languages. And the title of your session today, Andreas, is The Creation Myth of the Eddas and the Birth of Wisdom. And so we're really looking forward to this talk today. So welcome.
Great, thank you. Wow. Okay, that's what an it's it's good to have this. I will try my best to join in some of the discussions, but I'm a bit preoccupied today. But I'll see what I can do here and there. Goodness me, myth and meaning. That's like 10,000 years of symposium, really, for as an investigation, exploration. You can certainly set up many university departments exploring these two things, myth and meaning. So the first thing I will do, and I think it makes sense, is to put our gaze not to the east, near east, but to look sort of to the north, just for this presentation. Often many of us would look east or further from home when we think of wisdom traditions. It's something that's it's natural. It's something that's been going on for quite some time. But I think now there is more and more awareness that there is a little bit of gold where some of us are living, or certainly in northern Europe, including England and other places. Lots of little things are happening, especially in the area of the mythic explorations. But the first thing we have to do, and I think for all of us, is we have to define myth, and we need to get that right in order for us to build the temple, to build the house. There are many definitions. There are many great scholars out there that will define it in different ways. Now, the one that I use, and I have been taught myself to use, is from a professor called Sean Kane, who has written a wonderful book called The Myth Tellers. I would really recommend everyone to read it. And he's working out of the University of Victoria. Now, his definition really throws open the phenomena of myth, our own awareness of what it is and what it can be. And basically, he defines this. The first thing he defines myth as, and this is really to take note, is that myths have no author. Myths have no author. You cannot write a myth. Tolkien, of course, J.K. Rowling are coming close into the mythic realms, but a myth, if it has no author, it's from a deeper place. It's from a wider collective. So what would we imagine if myth has no author? Now, where on earth does myth come from if it has no author? And then he defines the next after that question. Sean Kane says that myth has no author. Myth is the power of the land speaking. Myth is the power of the land speaking. So myths really don't have much to do with human beings at all, in a way. They're from a there's magpies in myths, there are ravens in myths, there are rivers that are speaking in myths. It's not this idea that man himself or humankind suddenly conjured these things. It's coming from a deeper thinking, a deeper place of the earth itself. We hear this, of course, with Aboriginal Australia. We hear it in probably every single indigenous culture around the world, that when they talk of stories, when they talk of myth, and they speak of where their origins, they'll point to a mountain, they'll point to a river, they'll point to a forest, they'll point to some threshold. And for our own minds, of course, growing up in our own education, this is a bit of a challenge, right? We like to pursue the kind of more of the famous anthropocentric contexts. But what this means, for example, is that within myth, there is a dreaming earth, and there's a dreaming land, and there's a dreaming soil. And for this, when we look into the Norse material, we see exactly the same thing. We see exactly the same definitions. And what I would like to also to mention is that within the mythical explorations, because myth is the power of the land speaking, it has no author, myth is a terrible thing to study when you're studying history. Myths have nothing to do with history. What myths all have to do is the state of now, the moment that we are living in. So a famous Roman, I think he was a Roman general, or a Roman general philosopher, Salatius, always used to call out that myths never were. They always are. They are with us now. So when we work with, in the Northern tradition, we will work with the poetic Edda, which are basically language of unbidden images, language of the deep imagination of the earth. Then suddenly, when we read them, we recognize very quickly that this is all to do with the times we're living in. It's all to do with the climactic changes we are seeing around the world. It's all to do with the conflicts and the wars and all of this. It's pointing directly to our own time. So those are the things to get out of the way before I pursue some of the meaning, the mythic's meaning behind the Northern tradition, which I'll try and get to. I'll try and get to wisdom by the time I finish. But that's really important, because once we've established that myths have no author, we can start to create, we can start to build. We can include then the earth in our investigation. We can include your local river, your tree, and all the languages that they provide. Of course, language itself, words themselves, letters, the things we write, how we communicate, these sounds we make from our mouths, all of these consonants we are using, all have origins in the landscape from the very beginning. You know, the way we pronounce our words, all of that come from the earth itself. Every language is built, every single language is built. Tortoises created the Chinese language, the tortoise patterns. There are the runes that come from the ash tree in the Northern tradition. All the glyphs we see have either reeds or sand ripples or anything like that, or movements of the water. All of these structures are the origins of our lettering. So every time we practice literalism, every time we write, every time we speak, there's glyph magic behind, right? So again, we find that even our own language, which is again a huge importance when studying myth, also have the earthy origins of animals and patterns. For those of you who are interested in that phenomenology, you should read some of David Abraham's work, for example, of how our alphabets began, and from the cave walls, and how they were represented by the tracks of animals, and then how they became what they became today. So myths are the power of the land speaking. Let's start from there. Now, When we investigate and explore Northern myth, we find that there are 45 pieces of vellum paper. That's really, or not paper, animal skins. That's really what we have from they were found in 1643, 45 pieces of vellum, which had in them inscriptions of prose and poetry. And from 1643, there was a bishop who found these animal skins, but they were written down at around 1270, they believe. And when they were written down, they are echoing an older time, a pre-Christian time, which is the Viking Age and beyond, even older than that. So we're looking at 500 years. These vellum papers, these 45 vellum papers, were hidden from view. So from 1270, when they were written down, to 1643, they were hidden from view. No one knew they were complete. We don't know which family protected these papers. They were an Icelandic family that protected these papers because, of course, that time was those very difficult medieval times when pagan literature of that kind would have been destroyed, almost certainly. So they were protected in Iceland, and a bishop named Brynjolf Sveinsson found them then in 1643. He was an Icelandic bishop. He didn't put these vellum skins to fire. He didn't destroy them. Thank the Renaissance, potentially, for that. So he brought them to the King of Denmark. And that's why the poetic Edda is often referred as the Codex Regius, the King's Code, because these 45 vellums were brought to the King of Denmark at the time. I presume, obviously, it didn't get to fly there. He brought a great ship, brought them over, and there in Copenhagen they remained. And what happened was, at 1973, then the Queen of Denmark, she thought to herself, no, these incredible vellum pieces of animal skins with this ancient poetic and prose needs to be brought back to Iceland where they belong, because that's where they were written down. So they brought these animal skins back to Copenhagen, back to Reykjavik in 1973. But what's remarkable is because what's contained within these skins is all of what we know of pre-Christian Northern Europe, which is also extremely important for the culture here in England, of course. So the Anglo-Saxon culture. So what would be then essential is that these papers cannot be destroyed, or even have a risk of being destroyed. So they weren't even able to put them on a plane. Such was the preciousness of this cargo. They had warships, and they had weather maps and all kinds of people involved to transport each of these skins back to Reykjavik in a sort of parade. And that's where they remain today. And you can see them, for those of you who go to Reykjavik, you can see the original skins. Not very often they bring them out, but sometimes they do, but beneath glass, and you can see these ancient stories of the old gods. You can see, for example, why we got the names of the days of the week. You can read about the stories and the poetry from the world of the gods. Any author around? Not at all, right? These are, and the language in which the poetic Edda, for example, the Codex Regius is written in, is very what's called imaginatory and visionary. All right, so we have then these 45 pieces of vellum. So what do we find, and what's contained inside of this content? What is it that makes us have what does it relate to in our own lives? What would it relate to in our own society? Is it just a relic of the past, like a tomb that we can look at like archaeologists and think, oh, that's very nice, and then see it as a more or less a curiosity of some sort, an ancient relic? But not at all, not at all. They contain within them creation myths. They contain within them stories, and that have really stood the test of time. So within these stories, there is something that talk to us directly of what it is to be a human living on this earth, suffering on this earth, and going through difficult times. And they speak of the gods, and they speak of giants and all kinds of things. And really what this is what relates again back to the power of the land speaking, and particularly of Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime, is that in the creation myth, you find that there is a being that is born between fire and ice. So this being is a clay giant. It's an androgen giant. And this clay has in it a dreaming quality. And the dreaming quality is called a hug, H-U-G. And the hug is a form, you can say it's thought, but it's something more akin to dreams. And this being is the very first baby of the universe that the gods start to create the world with. They start to shape the earth with. And this clay then has this potential spark of thinking. So here we are immediately in the dream time. In the dream time of the land. The land itself, the soil itself, has the quality of being able to dream itself forth, to create from its dreams. So that's what we find in the creation myth. The other areas, the other images that we find is something remarkable called the Ginnunga gap, which is we can call for those of you who study Indo-European work, or who have done a lot of work from the Eastern traditions in India and Buddhism, or Far East, there is a context there called the Nirvana, which is a place of no wind, which is a place of no duality, where there is no suffering. It's pure consciousness. And in the Eddas, we find that this place is called Ginnunga gap. And Ginnunga gap is a place of a great gape. That's really what it translates as. Some people translates it as the mother of light, which is I rather really love that translation. Sometimes it can also be translated as a magical cauldron. But this is the very beginning in the creation myth, the very start of it. It's this non-dual place of pure consciousness with no hug, right? No dream time, no thoughts, no duality. But it has in it something of a potential spark. So like a cauldron will have the potential to receive something inside. Within mythos, within mythic thinking, in comparison to scientific thinking, you don't really question how something was brought forward. It's just a statement. So in science, you might say, you might ask the question why the Big Bang happened, right? But in mythos, in mythic thinking, the big fire that erupted into Ginnunga gap in the creation myth is just there. It was suddenly there was a potential in the Ginnunga gap, and it just started, and a fire started to burn inside this emptiness, this great fire. So fire often is seen as the beginning of the universe and also at the end. So fire is also seen as the beginning of our world and at the end of our world. Fire is the place of a giant power. This place has a name. Don't worry too much about the name. It's called Muspelheim. It's a place where the flame starts to really erupt. Creation has begun. As it burns in Ginnungagap, another realm appears, which is exactly the opposite, which is a realm of ice, completely as unlike fire. So that's the realm of Niflheim. These two places they're not antagonistic against each other, but they collide, the ice and the fire. We have there exactly the same as the pillars of the Kabbalah, right? We have there as the yin and the yang. We have it in all comparative mythology. It's the dual world that comes together, that starts to erupt from Ginnungagap. And when this duality comes into play, that's where the fire and the ice meet. That's really where you have then the birth of this clay, of this being, of this androgen being. The name of this being is Ymir, this screaming baby, the first child of the universe. And that clay then contains, like I've mentioned, all of this thinking and consciousness, and yes, consciousness as well. The dreaming consciousness is in this clay, born from these primordial worlds. We need to trace this back. When we do this, we look, comparative mythology is very helpful because we find that very similar notions are seen in the Rig Vedas. So when you study the Vedas, you find that, okay, there clearly was a cultural meeting point of Indo-European culture going further north. So a lot of these Eddic mythologies have a tendril down to India or to the Indian traditions, because what you find is this original baby. And what do babies do when they're born? They roar, they scream, as you know, right? And this screaming is often looked upon as the original mantra, the of the Rig Vedas. This screaming is as a form of vibration that it reverberates everywhere. You can still hear it. If you just turn everything off, there is a roaring going on in the background, whether it's in the sea wave, whether it's in the turbine engine, whether it's in the thunder, whether it's in the distant traffic. There's a constant humming, a constant roaring of creation. And this is the original mantra of Ymir. In northern parlance, you call that the original galder, which is your real voice. So if you want to practice that mantra, it's not sitting quietly at home singing but it would be to scream from the very depth of your being and as loud as you possibly can. I know it's not a very English thing to do amongst neighbors, but if you were to find yourself on a mountaintop, in a woodland, somewhere where you have some privacy, see how that can move your very, very core. Many of us have forgotten to do that. It's something that we sometimes need to do. A Native American teacher I once studied with, he always used to say, this is our spiritual cry. It's when we roar as loud, scream as loud as we can, not from the throat, but really from the belly button upwards. And when we do that, we align ourselves to this incredible energy and power that Ymir, the original Galder, the original mantra. And with that, the other comparison with the Rig Veda is that in the primordial sort of waters of the creation myth of the Norse, you get also the sacred cow. Her name is Adumla, and she's arguably one of the most forgotten goddesses of Northern Europe. There are star constellations for her, right? She was the one that her teats, when her teats were pouring milk out, when she stood in Niflheim, the sacred cow Adumla, the milk was all the stars and galaxies that we see above us. the reason why we still look upon our own galaxy as the Milky Way. Right? An older name for that was the Cow's Lane. So this sacred cow stood around the galaxy, and her teat poured out star constellations and galaxies and explosions and all of these things. And Ymir, the first baby, went to her teats and drank all of this in. So the dreaming being of Ymir drank in the power of the stars, the power of the galaxies and the suns and all of these. That was the milk of Ymir. And when Ymir drank all of this, the dreaming really started to happen. So from Ymir's dreaming, we get the giants born. We get the elves. We get the Landvetti, which are the spirits of nature, and the Vanir. We get a lineage of gods and goddesses from the lineage of from Ymir's body. So Ymir is, as Ymir drinks the stars, drinks all the suns, drinks all this energy and power from Adumla's teats, all of it then is a dreaming that then suddenly beings are born from Ymir's body. So that's one area, one line in northern myths where the beings are born from. Funnily enough, I will say this just as a side point. From his armpit, there's a lot of sweating when he drinks all of this, or they drink all of this. And out of that comes memory. Memory is one of the first things that are born from the original baby of the universe. Now, the cow Adumla herself, she also needs to feed. She cannot just give milk. And she feeds by licking ice from Niflheim, the world of ice. And she licks these ice blocks. And out of the ice blocks come the lineage of the sky gods, which are the ones that we hear about in the Eddas, called Odin and Thor and Frigga and all of the gods living in the realm of the sky, in the realm of Asgard and Valhalla and those places. And it is from her that all of the descendants of those gods come down. So there are two separate races of gods, one from Ymir and one from Adumla, and both are they are born in these primordial waters, and they are coming out. So there are two races, and that's what we find when we pick up these animal skins. We read about that first, and there is some antagonism, because basically the giants represent chaos. They represent the wild. They represent all of that which have little to do with our own morality. So a tsunami is a giant power. A volcanic eruption destroying a village is a giant power. So giants have often not been subject to temple building as such, or making of shrines, because they are regarded as more or less a wild, undomesticated, uncontrollable energy. Now the gods are therefore so giants represent chaos, right? And the gods then come in as forces of order. So the gods are in the business of pruning apple trees. They're in the business of making the roads. They're in the business of creating a place where we all can live and breathe and have a moment of respite before the giants come and take over again. Now, just as you know, if you're a gardener or anyone that's preparing a dinner, there is a primal law to this. And this primal law in Northern myth is called an urlog, U-R-L-O-G, a primal law. And the primal law states this: for anything to be created, there has to be a sacrifice. There has to be an offering. Try to cook a meal. Try to make anything with your hands without one. It's impossible. Okay? So you will always have to offer something in order to create. So the gods knew this, and they took the first baby of the universe, Ymir, themselves, and they took Ymir and killed Ymir. And Ymir was the first offering in order for the worlds to be built, in order for the things to be for the worlds to be created. But it has a price. So each time you make an offering, you accrue a debt. There's a spiritual price to pay. So when the gods killed more and more giants in order to make the worlds, in order to create the worlds, they realized that there is a debt that we all have to then be part of, and we are part of this debt. When this debt is going to be repaid, it means Ragnarök. It means the twilight of the gods. And that debt comes that the giants say, enough's enough of building roads and cities and gardens and pruning trees. Now we're going to show up as they are with climate change, and they're just going to rip through it and take what's theirs. And it's the order against chaos. But the gods try as mighty as they can to uphold order for life, for life, especially of Middle Earth, of our own planet, to be able to live in a sense that where we can gather herbs, fish in the rivers, sustain ourselves. And it is this that provides, it's kind of the first war that we see in the universe, in the myths, is this fight between order and chaos. And order wins just for a little while. Temporarily, order can be in charge. Now, for a moment, just to give you an image, a strong image, they take the skull of Ymir, once they've killed Ymir, and put it up in our world as the sky. And the brains of Ymir are the clouds. Even till this day, if you go to Sweden and probably Norway, farmers may look up and say something like, I wonder what Ymir is thinking. It still is something that they've been brought up with, and we still have that. And basically, the weather patterns are giant powers, right? So as we are trying to find order, a lot of the weather patterns we are seeing today are this kind of swirling whispers and echoes of what's called Ragnarök, what's called the time when the giants are coming to have their debt repaid, because they are owed a lot. Indigenous cultures know this incredibly well. So what happens when you take something like a fish from the river, or when you take a deer killing, a lot of time will be spent making ceremony to repay the debt that you have stolen from the wild. Our culture, we are completely blind to this. When you go and sit on a plane, or when you shop in the supermarket, the spiritual debt that you are accruing doesn't even come into our consciousness, right? So it means that we are living in a devouring world. Most of us are devouring, right? We are not repaying anything. In fact, we devour faster and faster every day. But this is something that the gods know and understand. So ceremony is often a time when you will sit and just take stock and give thanks. And if you can create something to give back something to the wild, that is a way of prolonging the inevitable, where the giants will show up and say, enough's enough. So the gods in the stories are constantly running around trying to find a way in which they can prolong Ragnarök, prolong the time when the giants will return. But they know it's impossible to stop it. At one time, the chaos will arrive, and of course, science will say the same. That some things are that even the Vedas they used to say it in the sense of first was creation, then it was preservation, and then it was destruction. Creation being the force of Brahma, and then you have preservation, the force of Vishnu, and then destruction was the force of Shiva. All three had to be there in order for this to work. So the gods here have a similar the northern Eddas have a similar understanding to this, that the destruction is also there in order for rebirth to take place again. So this first primal law is the spiritual debt. Then you have a second one, and the second one was that the sky gods and the nature spirits, they went to war against each other. And this was a terrible thing that happened in the myths. And here we have the second law, and we are nearing the idea of wisdom here, because the sky gods and the nature spirits, it so happened that, funnily enough, it's also very contemporary. It was a mistreatment of the feminine, mistreatment of a woman. The goddess of love. Sometimes she can be seen as a giantess. There's many. I won't go into that debate right now. But when she's represented as the goddess of love, she was burnt at the stake, Freya herself, and we don't know exactly whether this represented, well, certainly the first witch burning, but it was something that it was a form of mistreatment of fertility, potentially a mistreatment of the female body, the magic in which it holds. There was fear of it. So she was burnt 3 times in the myths and chained. And when that happens, the nature spirits, because she was a nature spirit, they went to war against the sky gods. And they fought for eons and eons. Terrible, terrible, horrible conflict. And this mistreatment had to be reconciled. What I find remarkable is it was Odin himself, the great, the father, the All-Father he's also called, who had the wisdom to look into this and say, we need reconciliation between the spirits of natures and the spirits of the sky. I mean, how much contemporary can you get looking at our world now? But the way they did it is they had a grief ritual. A literal vat was placed in the center where they could spit and cry into. And when they did that, they formed a ceremony of reconciliation between the sky and the earth. And they, in effect, unified heaven and earth. And this happened in the world of the gods. But it's absolutely certain that in Middle Earth, in our world, it still has not yet taken place. When they reconciled, a peculiar thing happened. They mixed their spit in the vat. Out of this spit came a being named Kvasir. And Kvasir represents wisdom. And it is regarded as the crown of creation. The highest of creation was when 2 opposing forces come together but form an alchemical unification inside the vat. And the vat's name is Udrerir. And this vat is very, very similar to the medieval Grail that we read about in the Grail stories. And it seems as if the center of the Grail is that when 2 opposing spiritual forces can actually make peace. And that's when wisdom can be brought forward. It can become alive. And wisdom can appear. And wisdom has appeared in the world of the gods. It has been glimpsed there, but not here, not in our world. So it's another urlog. And this urlog is a force, another primal law, that if you want to seek wisdom in your own life, you know. There is no place for you to find it amongst the cozy, like-minded thinkers that you're with. Forget that. Wisdom is found when you go and meet the other. When you see that which you are not, that you have to then reconcile with. So, for example, you could say today that Jewish children growing up should really there should be a government plan, but they should spend 6 months with a Muslim family. Right? Or if you are people who take gap years, like young children, if they want to be awakened to wisdom, they have to go and meet and see and live with cultures completely different from their own. And this is something that Northern culture called Finfara, Finfara. Finfara meant that in your life, similar to walkabout, in your life, for wisdom to be received, you have to step out of your village, step out of the coziness of your spiritual or whatever that is, and go and meet someone or something, or go to a place where you meet the other. That is what the Eddas speak about. That's where wisdom can be born. But it's challenging. It's not easy. Okay, it's not something I'm not here as a spokesperson to be the number one example of it. It's hard gig. It's a hard gig. It's so hard that wisdom hasn't even been placed in Middle Earth yet, because this reconciliations, these wars we are seeing around us, is the absence of wisdom. It's the absence of it. And it is the absence of the ability to see the other and to meet the other. So the gods, the sky gods and the nature spirits went and they did that. And out of that, wisdom was born. Last thing before I finish, in the Eddas, in creation myth, who were our first ancestors? How did we come about? And I'll hope you can ruminate on this today, because ancestrally, we are said to have been born out of two trees. One, all women were their original mother, their original female ancestor. Her name is Embla, which is the tree of the elm. The elm is the original ancestor of all women, all the way back. And it was breath, spirit, that was blown into that tree, and a woman was born from the elm tree. Men were born from the ash tree, ask, which is the original ancestor for men. So trees were the original ancestors of humankind. They are our most revered ancestor. And the great ancestor of the universe, the great anima universalis, the kind of the highest image in terms of keeping all of the chaos, all of the order, all of the gods, all of the worlds together, is a great, beautiful tree, sprinkled in starlight. And her name is Yggdrasil, the great tree. And I will end this talk by just reciting in the poetic Edda in Old Norse, her praises. And it goes like this. En ask vet ik standa, heter Yggdrasil, har badm och sin vita årin. Sadan komma dögvar taur sidala falla. Ständer eufir grön I urdi brunni. And this means an ash tree I know, a high tree named Yggdrasil, and from her come all the dew that fall in the valleys, and she stands forever green over the well of memory. And she is the one that holds up all of the structures in the Eddas. And how and what are the Eddas in terms of name? What do they mean? Edda, it means grandmother, the voice of the grandmother. Edda means, poetic Edda means, Edda is grandmother. That's the translation of it. So what I've just said, these are all grandmother's speech. All of it is grandmother's speech. and all of it coming from the landscape of Iceland, where the fire is, where the ice is, and all of those things. So I hope you enjoyed this little talk, and thank you for listening. And I hope some of this can be spurred into some food for thought later on the day. Cheers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andreas. Fascinating, as always.